It is totally a global event. So Peter and I are sitting here in Geneva. Richard, who's just joining us, is, in another part of the planet. And so the spirit here is totally international, and I think we've all experienced that today. If there's anything else to add, I'd just like to really thank our sponsors once again. It's really important to remember that a lot of thank you, Peter. There are a number of them. You'll find them also in the sponsor area there on the left side of your screen. The sponsors have really enabled us to put on this event, and we thank them a lot. It's also enabled a lot of students to participate that couldn't otherwise afford the entry fee. Even though the entry fee is relatively low, it can be a barrier, and we're really glad that we can include everyone. So that's really it for me, unless there's something else you want to add, Peter, that I've forgotten at this stage.
Maybe the one thing I'd add is 24 minutes of UX. So if you're liking this, then we do have a podcast as well called 24 Minutes of UX. You can find it on our website, but you can also just write 24minutesofux.com and it'll take you there. And the whole concept behind it is very smarty to this event. We connect a seeker of UX wisdom with a giver of UX wisdom, meaning that it's not us talking, smarty things there, but there's a person who is asking questions and the person who is giving them answers. And just so you can sort of think a bit about it in a different way, in one of our earlier episodes, the person who was asking the questions is the head of user experience at the Swiss Railways. So it's not that the seeker is always a junior person. We are in a non-stop learning world. So, wherever you feel maybe it's a completely new area and you just want to extend your research by connecting with others, drop in your name. You can register on 24 Minutes of UX, drop in your name and the topic you are looking for advice in or where you want to give advice, and maybe we'll be able to connect you with someone in the future. And without further ado, Richard, we have had you here on the screen for a while. Sorry for not really addressing you, and the reason why Jesse was a bit also thinking about where you are right now is because you're normally based in the US, but I'm also not sure right now where you are because you mentioned earlier that you might be traveling.
No, I'm not sure where I am. I think I'm in Vermont, but it often changes. When I last talked to you, I was in Scotland. I might be in Texas next week. So yeah, but Vermont.
Very good. And so the reason we have Richard here is because we always tackle very important topics. Like in last year's 24 Hours of UX, we brought a speaker around systems thinking. And this time around, we brought a speaker around drunk user testing. But it will be about much more than that. So this discussion will really be a bit different than the talk so far because we're not going through slides. It's not sort of a structured presentation. It's a conversation, and we have these themes: me, we, and us. Me being more around sort of personal growth, the we being more around user experience as a general thing, and us being about connecting user experience with wider topics in our ecosystem. And we weren't sure, we tagged this with we, but it easily fits with me as well, because I think it really touches on that. How do I differentiate myself? How do I put myself out there while also producing something useful for the topics? So let's get into it. So when I found The User is Drunk several years ago, I was like, oh, is this website awesome? No. Does it look great? No. Is it an awesome idea? Hell yeah. And so we thought, okay, we'll reach out to Richard. And can you just tell us sort of where did this idea come from that you would do usability testing on a site while being drunk?
Yeah, it came from where most ideas come from, which is I had too much to drink one night, and my friends like, "Can you look at my website?" I'm like, "Yeah, man." Sure, this is bad. And then I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not able. And he's like, actually, no, this is really useful because you're being really honest and you're actually saying things that I knew, but I hadn't really been appreciating before. You should do this more often. I'm like, okay, whatever. And that just sort of percolated. It was like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. This is actually really useful advice. And then the interesting thing about the user is drunk. So we're talking about the userisdrunk.com. It's a website where you can go online and you can pay me money to get drunk and look at your website. You know, our tagline is that like your website should be so simple a drunk person can use it, which is one way of thinking about it. Here's the website. As you can tell, I am the king of design. There is no one who is better at design than I am, right? Like this is a bad, transparent thing. Really, all I wanted to have was some small text and like a photo of me to show that what was going on. But what ended up happening here is I'm wearing this shirt for a reason. I went to join a thing called Hacker Paradise, which was like a drop-in digital nomad experience, and I did it in Bali. I left San Francisco. I got mugged. Didn't like it anymore there. I wanted to go somewhere else. Went to Bali and was at this hackathon. I didn't have a good idea, but I remembered the month before, and I was like, oh yeah, I was really drunk, and that was useful. And then I knew about this one phrase, the user is drunk, which actually came from an Australian designer whose name I'm forgetting right now. He also has some videos up about this. But what he hadn't done was made a website where you could pay him to get drunk. No one had done that before. So I'm like, I'll just do that during this hackathon. So that's why I made that website within around 20 minutes. Like it wasn't a lot of thought, right? I just stole a design I had from another website, threw it in, put it on Hacker News, and then watched as like it went and went. And people seem to identify with it, probably because it's the dumbest idea in the world. But what I ended up doing is just like, you know, pay me money to get drunk. I guess, yeah, that's where it came from. That's how it started. I spent the next month bouncing around. I swiftly raised the price. It was originally $50. Like, pay me $50, I'll buy a bottle of beer and like buy one for my friends. And then people kept buying. And so like I went back to economics 101 and was like, okay, well, if people are buying it, then if you don't have the supply, you just raise the price. So I just raised the price so people would stop buying, and then people kept buying. So I raised the price again and again and again. Ended up at one point just putting $500. Like if you pay me $500, I'll get drunk for an evening, because my liver can only take so much. So yeah, that's where it started. That's how I went. I got 100,000 hits in the first week. That first day was bizarre. I did not expect it to go anywhere. Did not expect anything to happen. And it was just boom. And now I'm the drunk guy.
The idea that evolved though, so all of you who are watching are like, okay, like this guy's getting drunk and testing websites. Okay, no, there's more to it. Trust me, it's coming there. But it did evolve. So you mentioned that, you know, beyond the price hike, there were some other things that you were doing as well to add on to the initial idea. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I started out with just the idea of let me just record myself going over your website. So it's kind of a mixture of a service, right? It's half of a user experience like testing. So just looking at a user, looking at the website, which is a drunk person, me. But then I'm also a designer. Granted, on theusersdrunk.com, not a very good designer, but I have designed other websites that are much better designed than that one. You know, it's kind of like the car mechanic's car. Who fixes the car mechanic's car, right? You know, it's like too busy fixing other people's cars. But what I started doing was actually not just having a drunk review. I would do a drunk review for 20 minutes, and then the next morning I would do a review, or hopefully the morning after that, so that I wasn't just totally bitter and horrible. But what I would do is be like, okay, when I was drunk last night, I didn't get this. This was something I failed to notice. And then I paid someone to write all those thoughts up in a PDF. Here are some quick wins. Fix these things and your site will like improve conversion rates immediately. Here are some spelling errors. I'm a copy editor at heart. I have degrees in linguistics, and so I would notice all these little things. Like this could be worded a bit differently, which is not what you really want from a user experience tester, but people seem to like it, and it seemed to work. We had one person from HubSpot that hired me with the idea of having them higher in the rankings. They wanted to be able to use that, and they paid a bit more. And the person who hired me ended up going on a tour talking about like drunk testing as a service and how useful it is. And apparently we increased ROI by something like 60% on the pages I looked at, which is amazing, right? That's really cool. So a combination of, yes, it's a silly video cap of a user who's drunk, who's also a designer giving bad advice, but also soberly going over and being like, okay, here's where I missed. Here's where I should have done. And I think maybe you can change this a bit, and maybe your marketing isn't, you know, you could change that. Try it. And that sort of, it worked.
Can you give us, sort of looking at Lorenz, and let's for a second before we go on into the next theme, also think about, okay, like let's really think about what learnings are out there. So are there any returning things that, really come out in all or most websites, which, are testing drunk, or are there any anecdotes that you can tell us about?
Yeah, number one thing is don't have too much text. People love putting text on website, but drunk people don't read text. And drunk people is a really good just proxy for people who don't have a lot of time, right? Older people who can't read a lot of your really fancy, transient, small, thin, like Helvetica stuff. If there's a lot of text, it's going to be hard for them. Parents who have kids on their lap trying to read a lot of text on a website isn't going to work. So shrink everything down as much as possible. Just shrink it down, make it easier. Don't have too many calls to action. It's confusing, it's like, okay, do I click on this, do I click on that? Proofread your sites. Gosh darn it, that's not that hard. Just proofread it, right? Get someone who can be a proofreader if you can. And then another thing is the main thing that really annoyed me is don't use carousels. We're not in 2002. Please stop using photo carousels. They don't work. People don't like looking at them. It's confusing. It grabs your attention with no reason. So that's like another major thing that I would point out to most people. As far as anecdotes, I guess there's another site, which is that you don't have to match the crowd. My favorite website I ever analyzed was a website that someone paid me. I gave them the student discount of like $75, which like I had for people who were just like, can't pay, just whatever. Sure, I'll put you on another one. I usually like 2 or 3 a night, right? Because if I'm only taking 20 minutes, why would I get drunk for 20 minutes? Let's just stack them. It was this perfect website. It was so good. It was exactly what I wanted. It was clear. The text was clear. And it was just white with black text. No photos, nothing. It was just, this is my website. Here's a blog. White, black text. Default text. 14 point. Like, for a lot of the stuff that we think designers need, frankly, the SEO on that thing was great. Like, everything was really good about it. So thinking outside the box, like you don't have to go and download the best Squarespace template or WordPress template and find the best stock photos that everyone's going to look at and be like, okay, yes, it's a guy on a lake, whatever. Like, be strong enough to be different. That's okay.
We also discussed that you sort of paired up with someone as well for a while on doing the tests together with someone. So it's not just you looking at it, but there's interchanging as well.
Yeah, so I think the main, I did a few different types of that. The main one that I did was I made the user as mymom.com, which my mom didn't get drunk. It actually wasn't even my mom. It was my co-founder's mom for that website, because I was talking to my friend Scotty, and he was like, we should use my mom. I'm like, I don't really get along with my mom that well. He's like, well, I do. Pam's great. So now I'm really, really good friends with Pam. She's the best. She lives in Boulder. And that one was like, my mom is tired of your shit, fix your website or something was the like logo for that. And basically she would look at a website and she would get angry. She would get angry and confused. Like, why am I looking at this website? I wanted to click here and it's not, I'm out. It's like, and it was really good advice, because a lot of people don't have users who have the ability and time and also like strength to say this sucks. And so having a user who's able to do that, like if you do a lot of user testing, the users will often keep trying. They're going to keep trying because they're paid to do so for a set amount of time or something. Having someone who just is like, no, I'm angry. This sucks, Richard. Can you tell me something else to do? Is really useful. It's a weird service. It kind of violates a lot of the, psychology principles that we have around, you can't mix the interviewer and whatever. I don't think any of that matters. What matters is giving advice that's real and honest, and then passing that on.
I think there's a lot of sort of depth to these, despite the fact that they are sort of lighthearted things. Because when we're talking about accessibility, one of the core things is that accessibility is not just someone being drunk, but someone being blind, but actually maybe, just drunk when they want to order an Uber and, they can't see correctly. A temporary problem can also cause issues with usability. And similar to this, I think a lot of the practices around UX have become so entrenched and codified that we sort of don't dare get away with it, although at the end of the day, the real point is that people can use what you put in front of them. So I like how these come together, but sort of changing to the more serious stuff. you were
Quick
doing
note on the accessibility bit. I have deuteranopia. I have red green deficiency. Like 1 in 8 men have red green deficiency. Stop mixing red and green on your websites, please. Like, please. Just there are other types of accessibility besides drunk, moving, traveling, parent, distracted, old, blind, colorblind. Just you have to think about them all. Otherwise, you're just losing. If you're losing 1 out of 8 males, that's 1 out of like 16 people. That's a large part of your market, depending on what market you're in. So please think about that, people. Please. Sorry.
No worries. And basically, when we were discussing, because I originally reached out, I thought it would be a fun topic, but then you turned, serious, because you mentioned that you were living this sort of digital nomad life before it was cool, but then came the sobering, so to say. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So I mentioned leaving San Francisco and going to Bali. How fun. How cool. I am super privileged, right? I am a white, well-educated male who is a native English speaker from America, who has multiple university degrees, who's from an industrialized country, who is relatively rich by the world standards, right? I'm in the 1% of the world. And there's nothing I can do to get away from that. That's how it is for me. And I realized at some point, this sobering up, that this site worked. It worked really well because people saw me as a drunk bro, and they didn't question that. Like, it worked because I was those things. I don't think it would have had the same worldwide effect if I had been a young African-American man from the South without education. And that sucks. That really sucks. That's not something I'm proud of. That's not something I'd like to be in a society where that's the case. And I started to feel like actually maybe what I'm doing is not great, because I'm perpetuating a culture where drinking is seen as something that's fun, and it's seen as something that's okay to do, and it's seen as something that's like, ha ha ha. And yes, it is nice to have beers with friends. It is nice to go to Indonesia and have a good time and do yoga after being hungover. Like, that's true. But it's also important to think about the long-term implications of what you're doing and how you're doing things. So I basically shut down the user is drunk. I wrote a big post saying the user is sobered up, saying like, I'm not sure this is the kind of culture I want to be in. And while I've continued to take clients here and there, because it is actually a nice way to make some money and have a good dinner with my friends, and I don't think that shutting down everything I'm doing just because I have privilege makes sense, I've never advertised it. I'm giving this talk. This is rare for me. I don't really talk about the user's drunk. It's not something I want to talk about. It's not something I'm proud of. It's something that's just happened to me, right? It's like, it's cool, but it's like, there are better things I can do with my time than walk around and talk about drunk user texting and making sure that drunk people can use your app. Like, I'd much rather talk about what I talk about on my normal job, which is like, how do we decentralize the world and stop having corporate involvement in open source drain all the life out of the system? Because open source is what underpins our technological society, right? That's a much harder problem to deal with than after 5 beers, is it harder to press the button than after 4 beers? Right. And so it just became a switch for me where it's like, okay, that's something you did. That's great. Recognize that you're privileged. Be okay with it. Sit with it. Don't be okay with it. Sit with that. And do what you can to actually make the world a better place. And maybe you've already shown that this works, but don't make it the center of your life.
There's 2 sort of main things from this that I think, it's not something that we discussed earlier in detail. But the 2 main themes for me is, on one hand, if there's a stupid idea that you have in your mind, then maybe one day, instead of watching, another Marvel movie for the nth time, maybe sit down, create a WordPress site, and just do it and put it out there. Any thoughts around that, and sort of any message for the next generation on this part, which is this sort of really putting yourself out there? There's a lot of our listeners who are new to UX. I mean, when we first discussed, you also mentioned that you're not at core a UX person, you're more a full stack developer who also understands UX, but that's not the main thing you do. You just involve it in your everyday thing. But how sort of would you, or is there anything that you would recommend to people who are trying to get out there, make a name for themselves around this area?
Yeah. 1, don't do it with drunkenness, because it will affect your career. 2, yeah, make things. Be inclined to action. it's so much more fun to make stuff and fail than it is. The other thing is develop a thick skin. Around a 9/10 of the projects I start fail, and that's okay. That's okay. Like the other 10% do great, right? And the reasons those do great is because they're collaborative. So if you're going to go out and make something, make it with someone else and enjoy the experience of doing it. It's not even really about the product. It's about, if you get your money back for making the thing, and if you enjoy working with someone else and you learn more about how to be a good professional in the field and how to share and grow your network, you have succeeded. You don't need to make everything $1 million business. You just need to enjoy what you're doing in a way and make sure that you're not losing money, right? That's Warren Buffett's #1 rule of investing. Don't lose money. Second rule, don't lose money. Not that hard, right? Just go out there and just do stuff all the time. I'm inclined to action because I have like massive ADHD, which is super fun, right? I have cool ideas. I write them down in a little book or on a sticky note or whatever, they're all over the place. And every now and then I'll just do one, that's fine. And so I would encourage that for anyone who's interested in getting into the field. People will notice if you show up and do the work. You can have the ideas too, but if you just act on maybe 1/10 of them, people will notice and they'll be more inclined to work with you in the future. So very supportive of that.
Jesse, I guess this sort of resonates with 24UX, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm having flashbacks to 2020 early on, where we did something a little bit silly and it turned out to grow way beyond what we first imagined. So that's really nice. I have a question for you, Richard, about where you are currently in your sort of, I would say, somewhat dual role as a developer and a designer, and what you see are positive trends and negative trends in the way people are building solutions today, and whether some of your experience as a drunk user tester, but not only apply to what you're doing today in your work.
Whew. That's a really tough question for me to answer because I never really know how to describe what I do to people. I am a designer. I do design websites. I do design interactions with people. Mainly, I'm a community facilitator. I also run things like the UX and sustain open source design podcast, which is about how do we sustain designers in open source and have open source projects get designers. So I think about that all the time. And that's kind of a union of what I was doing when I did the Users Drunk. When I was a full-time developer professionally, I was working for MIT at the time, right? I was building tools for scientists to annotate scientific software. I was not a UX person then. I was just a dude who was building UX because no one else was working on my team. It was a one-person project. So what I've taken from that, which works today and how people are doing things, is I'm all for multiple versions of identity. Thinking of yourself as just a UX person is going to shoot you in the foot. It's going to kick you in the mouth. Like it's going to do whatever. It's not going to go well. You can do that and you can sell it that way. But everyone who is a UX person, everyone who's a designer also has to wear other hats. And I would really encourage people to continue to realize that any term that's made up for a job description has been made up. UX designers weren't here 50 years ago. People were doing UX design 50 years ago. Like people were doing that as a job, but they weren't called that. And so thinking of yourself as one person, it's just like, it's not helpful. Maybe it's helpful to the employee committee, and maybe, it's helpful for you if pitching yourself to someone if you're trying to get a job or trying to get be a consultant. Sure, that's fine. But you don't have to do that. In the same way, if you see a need, go fill it, right? There are probably things that came out today which someone has clicked and said, oh, that's a thing I could do that I haven't done before. I saw there was a cool Arabic session going on. Mm-hmm. That is awesome. I guarantee you that there's probably not a lot of people out there who specialize in left to right design for mobile websites by looking at all of the mobile websites that have both. So why don't you specialize in that if you want? Is that a career? No, not yet, but it could be, right? You could be like an Indo-European Semitic alphabet UX tester person. And let's just call that, a trans international localizationist, right? That's now a new job. Great. Go be that person. So stop thinking of yourself as like one thing, but start using those labels as tools. As the famous saying goes, all models are wrong. Some are useful. And I feel the same thing about designer, UX person, developer, community manager.
These these kinds of relaxed but serious kinds of talks are I think really good. And to close it off, my last question is: you mentioned this sort of privilege part, and we've had a lot of talks around this, and we'll have some more as well. Some of us here from the Philippines talking about the post-colonization times, and so we brought this topic of East and West, white privilege versus not. What would be, and you already mentioned that, looking into yourself and realizing the privilege, embracing that, not embracing that is one thing. Is there sort of a specific action that maybe you would sort of give people to maybe, as you said, change the world for the better through only yourself with a small action?
Yeah, shut up and listen. Stop going to act. Stop acting. Do less. People who act out of values and principles that they've internalized from their youth, and they're more likely to cause damage. People who listen are more likely to be able to see what other people are actually trying to say. So read more. Don't worry about getting the land acknowledgement right. Don't worry about white supremacy taking over your country, which it's doing here. You can worry about that thing, sure. But instead of worrying, instead of thinking, what can I do to act? Shut up and listen to the people who are affected and see what they're asking you to do. Take an hour every day to do very little, but work on how am I internalizing colonialism and white supremacy and what I do, and what are people telling me that I do, and how could I actually sit with that emotional discomfort. I have to sit with the emotional discomfort of being a person that some people know as the drunk guy. That's not great. And yes, it was colonialist to go to Bali. Bali is a country which colonialism has just totally destroyed. That sucks, including my country, right? My country helped fund massive genocide in the 60s. And we know that. That's on record in Indonesia. So was it good for me to be there? I don't know. But I do know that if I had shut up and listened more to the local people and that's what they'd actually wanted, I probably would have done a bit better. I probably would have made the world a bit of a better place. And so learning that now is really important for me, and it's really uncomfortable and it sucks, but that's okay. Learn to sit with that. Sorry, that's really dark stuff.
It's very funny that sort of how things come so full circle, because I mentioned that last year we had a system or a systemic design topics, some thinking topic from Balazs Golden, and he actually mentioned that there's this saying like, don't just stand there, do something. And what he says is sometimes don't do something, just stand there.
Yep.
Just sort of think through what is happening, because we are, and in the previous quote is also mentioned that sort of we have a quick thinking brain that wants to act on preset principles and actions. If we don't just stand there but do something without thinking, will trigger the most basic actions. And the most basic actions may be things that we learned in school or in a UX course as well. It doesn't need to be something that's inherent in us as sort of humans. But if we stop for a second and think through, why am I doing this? Is this the correct thing to do? Or is it just because it always comes, beforehand in the diagram? Like, what's the real thing? So it's good to see that systems thinking and drunk user testing can make a handshake at the end of a talk.
I want to push back on one thing, which is that you don't sit and listen so you can find out what the action is. You sit and listen because that's the act. That is the act. You don't have to have a result out of it. That's thinking that way is your fast brain being fast again. Like, okay, if I sit for a week, I'll have something I can do. No, that is the practice. So it's just something. It's a small fix, and it's really hard, especially for people who grew up in our environment, our shared environment of like Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. But yeah. Anyway,
great stuff.
Also, go get drunk and have fun sometimes. That's okay too.
Exactly. I was going to ask if that still occurs.
It does every now and then.
Sure. Are you available to come to the session Q&A if there's a couple of people who might want to join us and ask some questions? So what you can do is in the top left, you'll see a circular blue logo. You'll be able to click on that and go to sessions.